Hello and welcome to this extra special Harper Voyager event. Making the mundane magical, we have with us the gorgeous Robin Hobb and the ever wonderful Cari Thomas in conversation. Robin and Cari will be discussing Cari's debut novel, the thrilling Threadneedle, and also writing fantasy in a modern and urban setting, with myself, Dan, as your gracious host. So welcome, Robin and Cari. How are we both?
I'm fine.
Thank you,
Thank you
Dan.
very much.
Yes,
Excellent.
I'm very good.
And
Thank you.
how is the weather over there, Robin? Because you're a bit further afield than me and Cari, because we're actually around the same location. So how is it over there at the moment?
We are having a horrible drought and it's much too hot, and none of our houses have air conditioning because whoever thought this would happen to us. So hello, climate change. I'm spending most of my days trying to keep my garden alive. But I see that from Monty Don's Instagram, I see you guys are getting drenching rain in London. This is just not fair.
Yeah, I agree with that.
We've had a pretty miserable July, hasn't it been? But it's a nice day today. I'm coming in from Wales, so it's looking pretty good. I don't know what it's like over in Bristol.
Well, Bristol's about the same, but I think we should hopefully just pray that Robin gets some rain soon, because she needs it. We don't want any more.
Oh, please send it to me, please.
We would try. Well, the thing is, though, obviously talking about fantasy, maybe we can do some kind of summoning circle and we can get some rain over there for you.
Yeah, we can do a rain dance.
Carrie's very good at this. Carrie's good at this. She could, send it my way.
There you go. Which we will try. We will try. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Got some charms. I'll work at something.
So the first question I wanted to kind of put between you both to discuss is something that's always intrinsic to fantasy novels, and that is, of course, world building. Now, world building, every novelist knows, every reader loves a good fleshed out world with characters and settings and lore. So how do you go about building this gorgeous world that both of you have handled so well and has been so well received?
Well, I definitely want to hear what Robin has to say here, because I'm obviously on the beginning of my journey, and have written Threadneedle, and I've been plotting and planning for the next 3 books. But I know, Robin, that you've written a vast number of books, so many books that I can't imagine writing that many. And so how you keep track of all the different aspects of the world, it's very fascinating to me. And I can talk a little bit about what I do, but I definitely feel like you're the master of this.
One of the lovely things about urban fantasy, such as Carrie has written in Threadneedle, is that we can use all the shortcuts of the modern world. For instance, if I say my protagonist pulls up on a Harley Davidson, my protagonist pulls up in a Rolls Royce, my protagonist pulls up in a Kia. All of that is shorthand that tells you a great deal about the character right there. And so much of the world building is done for us when we're playing with urban fantasy set in a modern setting. And to me, that is one of the most delightful things about urban fantasy as a writer, is I don't have to invent quite as elaborate as a backdrop. So much the reader is going to do so much of the work for us.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's probably one of the things that attracts me to the sort of urban fantasy is I think it's the creativity as well, the clash of the world we already know, and then bringing in the world inside your head. And there's so much that you can do with that when they come together. I'm not sure yet whether I'll ever sort of attempt high fantasy and going into a completely different world, and how that would work and function in my brain, sort of having to create entire societies and histories, like I know you've done. I find it enough of a kind of mental challenge just to work with our world with that layer of magic on top at the moment. But I find it really fun to do, because there's so much you can play around with the modern world.
Yeah, I agree with both of you on that one, because obviously, as Robin said, you can utter just a phrase of modernity, like, she said, like a Harley Davidson or a Kia, And you're right, you're completely right. It kind of takes away the fact that you have to kind of explain so much about the mode of transportation or even the person themselves, because as Robin rightly said, you can gain so much information from that one small piece of writing, and then the reader can interpret that, you know, any way they want to. So Robin, obviously with your novels, they are set in a completely different fantasy world than something that is so modern. Did you find it a struggle when you first started writing to actually build this world, or did you feel confident you will get what was in your head across on the pages?
I think for every beginning writer, there's always that that you write it and you think you put all that information in, but it's not really there. And then even worse is if you are being critiqued by somebody who knows you, because if I say my protagonist is walking past the Blue Mouse Theater, if my critique person lives in Tacoma, they immediately know I'm in the Proctor district and they fill in everything about it. And when you're doing a fantasy world, and you say my protagonist is walking down a dark street at night, unless you say it's cobblestone or put in the sensory smells, it could be any dark street. It could be New York City in 2021, or it could be London in 1500. So you really have to, every sentence has to be carrying a really big weight of world building. You know, every sentence has to advance the plot or tell you something about the character or do something with the setting. And a really good sentence does all three.
And I was wondering, because I'm reading a couple of your books at the moment, the Wizard of the Pigeons, which I'm loving, set in Seattle, and that I think you started first with more urban fantasy. Did that kind of pave the way into the higher fantasy realms and teach you? Sorry, I'm just jumping in on the questions here, but and kind of teach you, you know, various aspects of how to, kind of move into that next level of world building.
Writing is Megan
sort of
Lindholm.
Different.
My first three books were Sword and Sorcery, were Key and Van Dien, some characters I love to this day. And then stepping into Seattle, as it was in about 1980, I think it was, and setting a fantasy there, because older cities have the same feel for me that the forest primeval brings out, which is so many people have walked here. And of course, European cities are very much older and carry much more of that cachet than US ones, where, our town's 100 years old. It's really been here a while. But I think, you know, your stories tell you where they want to be, and then you just have to do the best you can to get them there. When maybe I was just new enough to writing that I didn't consider it was going to be an obstacle. I had great fun researching it, going into Seattle of that time and sitting on park benches and having people come up and talk to me, and walking around and doing all the touristy things in Seattle, the underground tour and things like that, just to gain the background. So I'm sure you did the same sorts of research for Threadneedle.
Yeah, I mean, I was working in London for quite a long time before writing Threadneedle, and then I gave up my job. So I sort of was part-time freelancing, but I had that freedom for the first time, you know, in the day, where you could really just go off and explore. And you can live in London for so many years and not see most of it, you know. And yeah, I think it was just such a freeing year, getting to go to the British Library and going to little coffee shops and other, bookshops and libraries that I found to work. And yeah, I've always been fascinated with London, finding the kind of little hidden wild spaces. Oh, thank you.
I absolutely love your library. So it made me really want to go there. And I don't think that's a spoiler to say that. Are we being careful of spoilers?
Oh no, that's fine. I think that's on the blurb. I think that's on the blurb for the book. Yeah. So the British Library, I spent lots of time there. I mean, it was just the place you want to gravitate to. I think as a writer, it was like the beacon. I'm going to go there. And I don't know if you've been, but there's a whole process. You have to put all your bags in and check into the reading rooms, but it feels really magical once you get in. You're actually through into the reading rooms and the quiet of them. And I think that all just kind of seeped into the book, and then I started imagining this library buried deep beneath the British Library, which if only there was one, that would be great.
I am so disappointed now.
Yeah. I imagine they keep a lot of books deep down, so maybe there might be an element.
I bet the librarians have a secret hoard. So.
Yeah. Have you ever been yourself?
No, unfortunately, when I travel, I mostly look at hotels and bookstores, and they're remarkably similar all over the world. So I always, when I am in London, I always try to get up very early just to walk the streets, or to find a little time to drop into any museum that is close by where I'm staying. But the British Library, no, I've never been that lucky.
Not had a chance. Well, one day.
Someday.
I mean,
Someday.
I've been a little bit cut off from London recently, with everything going on, and moving to Wales and having a little one. So I'm very excited now that he's starting to get a bit older to kind of be able to do more trips and get back and leave him with a grandma and go off again, get inspired by the city again.
Well, you've got loads of you've got loads of inspiration there. I mean, as Robin said, it's such a magical place. I mean, it's just one of those things that there's a lot of rich history there, and I think it does come through in Threadneedle, because it has this kind of, when they first go there, she's literally just like, this is just a library, and then obviously it changes intrinsically to something that I think a lot of people who either go into libraries or into bookshops, in my opinion, it is a magical place without even having to have magic instilled in it. Reading and libraries and bookstores themselves, they just create a lot of joy, which I think you reflected very well in Threadneedle, because there's obviously, there's magic and mystery going on, but everyone who goes there is in awe of this magical library. So I think the British Library should be very happy with your portrayal of it.
Well, hopefully they know about it. I don't know yet, but they might hear about it at some point. I'll have to go back, since I'll
just
send them a copy. So. I'll just send them a copy. It's fine. Yeah.
You should, really. You really should.
Yeah, I agree with Robin, absolutely. So the next question I wanted to kind of put forward was, this is something, again, that is incredibly intrinsic to any kind of magical fantasy novel, sci-fi, is the magic systems. Now, obviously, without them, people probably won't read the book. They love a good magic system. So Robin, how did you find it constructing your magic systems when you first started out? Was it kind of, again, did you kind of know where you wanted to go with it, or was it kind of, when you were making the story, did you kind of think, oh, they could do this or they could do that? How did it come about? How did you use them in your novels?
My first urban fantasy was Wizard of the Pigeons, and there were when my lead character begins to realize that war has changed him, that he has become something that he was not before. He literally has a mentor who says, these are the rules you must follow. And those rules are rigorously adhered to throughout the story. And when you break the rules, things don't go well. But I think, most fantasy writers are great readers of mythology and fairy tales and all of the traditional magics that are there. And I think we all know there has to be, number one, limits. There has to be a limit to the magic. If you have three wishes, you've got a great story. If you have unlimited wishes, you have no story at all. So I think the limitations and setting those up in your own mind before you start writing are really essential to any magic system. The limitations are almost more important than what you're allowed to do with the magic.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. What you're saying about fairy tales, I think that they've been such a huge inspiration for, my magical system. And it's, I guess I've kind of made my life more difficult in a way, because in Threadneedle I say there aren't rules, but there are patterns, which I think has a kind of fairy tale feel to it. Fairy tales sort of work in patterns and symbols, and but then it's that question of limitations, which in some ways I've made things more difficult, but I do have a kind of I don't want to give too much away because there's still a lot to come, but there's a kind of the emotional side, I think, is for me where the limitations but also the possibilities come, because that's emotion is really key to my magical system. Actually, I know you've worked a lot with emotions in the realm of elderlings, and it's a really tricky area to work with because they're quite hard to pin down in many ways, and they're so individual. So I don't know if I'm making my life easier or harder with that, but I think it's a really interesting kind of area to build a magical system on. Not hard and fast rules necessarily, but something a little bit more sort of instinctual and emotional, maybe more feminine, I would say.
What I've enjoyed a great deal in Threadneedle was that these young protagonists they're learning the rules. They're also learning that maybe they have been misinformed about the rules and limitations. And so they're kind of, as we all do when we are at that stage of our lives, they're groping forward and saying, are these rules valid? Is this true? Has my upbringing actually prepared me for the world, or has it limited me? And I think that's something very powerful in the story you're telling. And I'm looking forward to how it will unfold in the future. So you're doing this very, very well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think Anna's definitely caught between, like you said, two different sort of systems, one that's incredibly repressive, and then another sort of guide in her life that has a huge taste for freedom and hedonism, and she's having to try and sort of find her own path through the magical world. And I love the idea of magic itself having its own agency and its own personality and its sort of own intentions as well, and sort of bringing that in too. So you never quite know what magic is planning, if it's on your side or if it's against you. Yeah, but also I was going to say before with working with emotions, whether there was any sort of how you found that with the the realm of elderlings and or your books there, and how you sort of wove them into your magical system. It's probably a big question, but
I work a lot with first person, with the protagonist telling me the story, and I think because for me it's the natural storytelling voice. I think it's very easy for the emotions to spill into the story, because the reader is processing them at the same time as the protagonist is. When I do third person, it's a little bit harder because I have to actually stop and tell you that somebody is trying very hard not to have their voice shake, or somebody's putting their hands behind their back so that nobody can see that they've got their fists knotted and they're just about to lose control. It's a different way of conveying the internal dialogue than when you're doing first person and it's right there and you're drenching the reader in what your character is going through. So it's two different things, I guess, first person and third person for conveying the feelings of the characters.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with my experience of, what I've read, as Robin says, I can imagine creating third person must be so much harder than doing first person. Just because, as Robin said, there's so much more you have to kind of take into account, just the description of what the person's doing versus if it's an internal monologue or if it's literally just like one running character. So the next question I pose to both of you, and we've just touched on it now, is fairy tales. something, you know, people think of Disney. No, we think more like Grimm fairy tales, or fairy tales, you know, that are Greek mythology or Norse based, anything like that. So Robin, was there any major influences that you took at all from any kind of fairy tales, any kind of lessons, or particular kind of story that you wanted to get across into your novel? And the same with you, Carrie. Was there anything that kind of struck you that you'd read in the past and thought, I could put that across in my story?
I was very fortunate to grow up in a house where we had a lot of books. And I had my mother's books from England that she brought with her, and I had my father's books from his childhood. So we had, you know, East of the Sun and West of the Moon on the shelves, and the lovely illustrated fairy tale books with the plates by Edmund de Locke and artists like that. So from the beginning, this was what was available to me. Even, you know, if I couldn't get to the school library, there was so much at home to sit down and read and look through Andersen's fairy tales as well as Grimm's. So there was a very good source within my house. And I think that that made a huge difference. I did not have to go and wait till I was a school child and could go out into school libraries or get out into the public library. We had a home library, and that made all the difference in the world.
I read that quote. I think I'm not sure if it's true or not. It's one of those internet quotes that says Einstein said, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be even more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. So I think that's a good collection of books to sort of start out with. Yeah, my mum had a book of fairy tales as well. It was kind of, it's almost like the one I describe in Threadneedle. It was like a white book with a little symbol on the front, and I just used to feel like the most magical thing in the world to me. And I think fairy tales, you know, as you both read Threadneedle, are a huge influence on the story. They're going to continue to be, and on the magical system and everything. I think the thing that fascinates me about them is they're just they don't feel like normal stories. They always feel like they take you to some slightly different in between place. They've sort of got their own rules, and I think it's the kind of place of the subconscious and intuition, and they connect to something deeper. And I'm fascinated by the idea that they're so universal. You know, there's the same fairy tales that appear across all different cultures, and you know, they've evolved and been told, you know, by word of mouth. They're these sort of living tales, and I just, yeah, love this idea of them as something very different from ordinary stories, and maybe they have different kinds of powers that they can give you when you read them. I don't know if you've read Women Who Run with the Wolves. By Clarissa Pinkola Estes.
It's on the shelves.
But
yes.
just it was just Dan, when you were saying if anything had influenced me, I think that book's probably one of the biggest influences. The sort of ideas that she has in that about fairy tales can kind of be instructional tales, almost kind of initiatory tales that have all this kind of hidden and buried knowledge in. I guess particularly from a female perspective, the book's written, you know, the idea that fairy tales began as kind of female oral stories, things that women told while they were sort of having to carry out a lot of the menial work and sewing and things like that, and they became tales of escapism and maybe something deeper as well, sort of carrying magical knowledge. And yeah, I won't go into it all because I know
For me, fairy tales are the stories that from the very beginning, you know, they're very simple, deceptively simple stories that look at some of the really big questions in life. For instance, if you stop and help the ants, later on, will the queen of the ants bring her army to help you do some impossible task where you're sorting out millet from, I forget what it was, sesame seeds? is, if you help something that is apparently much more small and helpless, pulling the thorn out of the lion's paw, the little mouse who does that. All of those stories, and so many of the fairy tales, I believe, are looking at the bigger question of the bigger questions in the world. If you have 3 wishes and you waste them, if something comes to you effortlessly through wishes, is it ever going to be good, or do you need to stop and really work for the choices you have and consider them very carefully? There's so many lessons in fairy tales that speak to a much bigger world, and so many of them deal with still, and as you said, across cultures, the common experiences, whenever you have a young person setting out to seek their fortune, it doesn't matter if you're getting your first job interview or going to college or whatever it is. Every young person in the world that I know at some point steps out the door and goes forth to seek their fortune. And so many fairy tales begin with that. Or so many, so many of the old ones, it's always the third son who is not the heir and who is setting out into the world with nothing, who is the one who makes his own way. So I just think there's so many wonderful things for kids to learn, for adults to go back to and think about in fairy tales.
Yeah, I agree. I think they contain so much wisdom, and it's not always sort of obvious on the surface. I think as you read the tale, it kind of seeps into you on a deeper level.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's kind of the fact that these tales are some of them thousands of years old, and you can still draw some kind of, lesson from it, and everyone kind of portrays it in a different way. And I think they're very important for people to read. So I don't know whether Einstein actually said that or not, but if he did, he was correct. I'll say that Einstein was correct either way. Because fairy tales, for me, they're always a good escapism. But then with both of your books, people want to lose themselves in a different world. And especially with Robin, because obviously, you've been writing slightly longer than Cari, you have such a fan base of people who, working in my store, I get people bringing the Assassin's Apprentice to the till and going, "Oh, I've never read these before," and I just go, "Well, you're in for a treat there." And it's so good to see so many years later that people are rediscovering your work and they're still loving it. I mean, when you first started out, did you ever think you would still, they would still be so influential to so many people today? Or did you just think, oh, I'll just write one and call it a day?
Oh, it was, there's certain stories that you carry with you in my experience, you carry with you for several years before you actually sit down and start writing them. And then it's it's an intense experience. It's like stepping into that world. There's a quote from Rudyard Kipling to, I believe, H. Rider Haggard, and I hope I get this right. And it was in reference to the book She. And Kipling said, you didn't write that book. Something wrote it through you. Now, I hope I've got that tale correct. But there is definitely that feeling sometimes that the story is waiting somewhere out there, and you happen to be the person who gets to chronicle it. But there are some books that are like that. I don't think I've ever sat down to write a book that I didn't care deeply about, and I think that comes through, or it doesn't, with something you're writing. So I care deeply about telling that story and about those characters. I still care about those characters, and they don't seem fictional to me. They seem like, I haven't had any postcards from them lately, but it definitely feels like they're out there somewhere continuing.
Must have been strange to sort of bring it to a close in a way with the last.
Every story has to have an ending, and most of them end where the next story would logically begin. but it was very, very strange to stop hearing that voice in my head. And I probably sound very peculiar talking about voices in my head, but it does feel that way when you're writing the story. The characters are talking and nagging and saying, go back and fix that. That's not really what happened. That isn't what I said. Or clarify what I said, because that person's taking it wrong.
That was definitely my experience with Threadneedle. It was yeah, it was there for so long, kind of pushing and wanting to come out, and then I finally kind of gave it the proper time, and yeah, it was like a flood, and letting these characters free, and yeah, it's I'm still kind of grappling with the experience in a way, that idea that, did I write it? Or did something else write it? Because yeah, it feels like you're almost a channel sometimes, but I think it must be something going on in the subconscious part of the mind all the time. I kind of start to think of it now as even when you're not thinking about it, the cauldron is still stirring somewhere. So the story
Yes.
is still writing itself, and kind of trusting that as well when you can't work on it, that when you come back to it, it's
just because I'm not writing doesn't mean I'm not writing. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm at the moment sort of working on book 2, and also something else as well, just a little side project. So that's kind of an interesting experience to see if there's room in your head for other within the same world, but other characters and aspects of the story to come through, and finding that there is, which is quite exciting.
That's just teasing. That's literally everyone
Sorry.
who's watching this now has just gone, she's doing book 2 and something else. So yeah, you're going to have loads of
Not
people
sure if I meant
messaging
to
you
say
afterwards
that,
say, well, that's it now. I mean, you've thrown it out there. You can't take it back. That's it. But the biggest thing for me, obviously, with both of your your world building and things like that is, Robin, especially with yourself, because you've been doing it slightly longer. Did you think when you first wrote novel that it would sell so well, or did you just think it would just do what it did? Do you have this kind of faith system of, if it goes it goes, and if it doesn't, so what?
Well, many people, for Robin Hobb, the first novel was Assassin's Apprentice, and I was quite astonished at how well it did. But for Megan Lindholm, there's 7, 8 previous books which did not, explode and have a wide readership. I had very nice reviews and very mediocre sales. So with Assassin's Apprentice, I'm going to give the credit to, I had in the US, I had a gorgeous cover by Michael Whalen, and in the UK, I had a John Howe cover. Now, you can't judge a book by the cover, but the cover art certainly does a great deal to lift a book out from the others on the shelves and get that attention. So I need to give a nod to those cover artists as being one of the things that took the book off the shelves and into people's hands so that they would read it. There's so many factors and so many wonderful books I've read, and I think, why wasn't this a #1 New York Times bestsellers? And then conversely, I will pick up something that's #1 and read it and say, I could drive a truck through the plot hole here. Why on earth do people like this? So, you do the best you can. You write your book and you send it out into the world, and then you put your head down and you keep writing. In that year of between turning in the final manuscript and seeing it on the shelves, you put your head down and you keep writing, and you just keep putting them out there and hoping for the best.
Yeah, I definitely would say, I mean, Robin, touching on that point of the cover design, Cari, you had Andrew Davis.
Hold up Cari's book. Pick that cover book behind you.
Here we go.
Up there.
Just look at it. Just look at it. It's gorgeous.
No.
I've got it.
Fingers off the front. Hold it up. It's absolutely gorgeous. And that is
incredible cover.
Stunning.
That is such a
Andrew Davis.
For you to sending that out into the world like that, because it really speaks to what's inside those covers. You've got a great cover.
I was incredibly lucky to.
May I ask, who's the cover artist on that? Do you know who that cover artist is?
So the cover artist is Andrew Davis, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah, Andrew Davis. He is incredible. He does phenomenal work, and he also did the cover for a limited edition one, and they are just stunning. He really does phenomenal work. He really does.
It is beautiful. It is really beautiful.
Harper Voyager and Andrew, I mean, they took the baby of my book and they just made all this magic from it. So I just feel really, really lucky and blessed, and the fact that people immediately loved the cover, meant so much. It was a little scary as well. I was like, you haven't read it yet. No one's read it yet. When they first did the cover reveal and everyone's like, I have to get this book. But yeah, it's just amazing. I'm excited to see what he does with the future covers as well, kind of how he continues the theme that he's created.
Well, I think it goes a long way with, I've spoken to many authors and publishers about, especially when it's a debut, and you look at something like yours, Cari, with Threadneedle, and the fact that it's a debut, how extra the hardback is, how beautiful it is. And I always say, especially if it's a debut, it reflects how much the publisher believes in your story with how much effort they put into the hardback. I mean, am I wrong, or do you think that is right? Because I think that they wouldn't waste so much love and energy on something like this if they didn't believe in both you and the story.
Yeah, no, I think that is the case. Harper Voyager were just amazing from the beginning, and I think they really kind of got the world, when I went into that first meeting with them, and it's just a team of all women. We call ourselves the Coven. So it's been a really creative, it's been a very creative process from the beginning, and everyone was just so excited and had so many ideas, and not just creating the cover and how it looked, but the marketing campaigns, and let's bind the book in knots and send that out to people, and let's do all these little creative things. So it's been really fun, and I just think it's, like you said, it's just amazing to have that kind of belief in the story and people that have been inspired by it, and seeing it become so much more than just the words on the page as well. Just wait for the fan art.
Oh yeah, loads of fan art. So this is probably like the last thing I'm going to touch upon, because unfortunately we're nearly out of time. But one thing I did want to kind of reflect on is, obviously, as we just said, about cover design and things like that. And Cari, you sat down with the Coven, you spoke to them, you kind of had like a bounce back of ideas, you had feedback, you had some say. Robin, what was it like when you started out as Robin Hobb? Were you involved in any of these kind of processes, or was it a case of, here's the cover, enjoy?
Let's see. If I go all the way back to Megan Lindholm and paperbacks, then definitely it was, you take what you get and you don't pitch a fit, as they teach you in kindergarten. And when it came to Assassin's Apprentice, the UK had enough faith in me, Harper Voyager, that it came out in hardback. Now in the US, it was a paperback, and the first two books of the Farseer trilogy only came out in paperback and in the US editions, though they did have the beautiful Michael Hoyland covers. In the UK, it was a hardback. John Howe, who I was not familiar with at the time, did amazing art for the covers, but it was very much, because it's such a distance, it was very much a presentation of, here's your cover. And I was very happy with it. I've been definitely blessed with wonderful cover artists, and some of the overseas editions have just amazing art on the covers. So not much consultation on those first books. Later on, as I got to know John and I would exchange emails about, well, what do you think this sword looks like? What is the, what does it look like? And I'd say, John, I'm still writing. If you draw a beautiful sword, I can change the text to match. So there was some of that behind the scenes going on. So it's Some of my cover artists I've had wonderful, wonderful relations with. Others I just know as the name on the inside of the book. It's one of the fun things about social media is it has opened it up so that you can chat with your translators, chat with your cover artists, and that was something that simply was not available when I first began writing.
And what's it like when you see people creating fan art and, you know, bringing a world alive with their own, you know, imaginations?
To be absolutely honest, sometimes I see things that absolutely appall me, and other times I'm astonished and thinking, why are you not uh, being paid for the wonderful work you're doing? So it runs the full gauntlet. Every reader reads a different book, and every reader sees a different fits or a different any character. Everybody sees it differently based on their own experience. I mean, if I say the words "the river," Carrie's seeing one river, Daniel's seeing another river, and so no, even if I describe it, you know, with 4 sentences after that, it's still being superimposed on your first experience of this is what defines the noun river. So when I see fan art that does not match at all what I had in mind, there's first there's that, oh my goodness, and then you realize that's their river, or that's their fits, or that's their night eyes, and it's not invalid. It's simply through their filters. So there it is.
Yeah. I always love it when people try and imagine who would play who in a movie or the TV show, and they do the lists of their visions of the characters.
Yeah, it's I think it's, as Robin said, everyone sees it through different eyes, and I think that is, you know, kind of tying in with everything. It is the magic of why you write, because people literally, they have different visions of all the characters, the locations, the magic systems, the people they want to meet, the people they want to be. So I think on that lovely note, ladies, we are going to draw to a very nice close. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. You have been looking at the gorgeous Robin Hobb and Cari Thomas, and you can get Threadneedle now at Waterstones or any good bookstore. And Robin's complete plethora of beautiful books is also available at Waterstones and other bookstores. Have a fabulous rest of your day. My name is Dan Bassett, and I have been your very gracious host. Thank you so much,